destroying it. Thank you.
To the fulfillment of a dream. That man touched every inch of this parkway. How marvelous that 50 years later you can come back and say, I touched that, and how marvelous. We are proud of you. I want to reach into the audience and touch a man who right now is working on a tape recorder. Mr. Lynn Harris, please come front and center. I want him to stand front and center with a pennant, and you'll see something. In order to have a logo, there must be brains. There must be dreams and visions. Mr. Lynn Harris, working with Mr. Abule and Mr. Stan Abbott and others, devised that beautiful logo. Mr. Lynn Harris, we are honored and thank you very kindly, sir. It's amazing the touches it takes, remarkable the touches it takes. Something else, it's difficult to realize how many different agencies had to touch this parkway for it to develop and materialize. The state of North Carolina had to buy the land and donate it. Virginia buy the land and donate it. But not only that, to do all sorts of other work and to tell about what the state of North Carolina did. I want to share with you our grand gentleman, Mr. J. Gordon Gibbs, State of North Carolina Highway Commissioner.
Hello, friends of the Blue Ridge Parkway. I have 5 minutes to tell you how North Carolina responded. That's according to Gary Everhart here. He thinks in 5 minutes that I can tell you how we responded to this dream. It's impossible. Do you feel as I did this morning as I came in sight of these hills again? I felt sort of like the pilgrims as they were marching into Jerusalem when they said, I will lift up mine eyes unto the hills. I love these hills. You love these hills. I was here when this thing started 50 years ago, right here in Allegheny County, 50 years ago working on the Parkway. And I'm glad to be back with you here 50 years later. But in 5 minutes, I can just only give you the highlights of what North Carolina did. To start with, North Carolina had no laws that would permit us to acquire land and convey it to the federal government for the building of the Blue Ridge Parkway. Consequently, in January 1935, it was first necessary to pass a law that would permit us to participate in this manner, that would let us buy the right-of-way and convey it to the federal government. In 1935, there wasn't one road in North Carolina with controlled access. It was necessary for the state of North Carolina to come in and buy the right-of-way for a controlled access road and convey it to the federal government. In 1934, on the 25th day of September, right back here at the Virginia line, we started the survey in the preparation of the topographic maps for the Blue Ridge Parkway. Over the next year and a half, we mapped the entire area, prepared the maps, and turned them over to the federal government in order that they might design the road. At that time, many areas of the mountains were inaccessible to us, particularly out in the area between Transylvania County and Haywood County. There were no roads, and it was necessary for us to move back into that area and camp at Cold Springs, Tennessee Ball, Reinhardt Knob. We would go in on Monday and come out on Friday. Someone had to stay and attend camp. Gordon Gibbs volunteered for that, and I would stay in there from Friday noon until Monday, minding camp. We would move that camp ahead about every 4 miles. Our food was packed in with horses, and I remember well on one occasion when we were planning to move camp in the afternoon, a storm came up and the pack didn't come in with our food. This is true, I'm not kidding you. We killed a groundhog and we made groundhog gravy, and we ate groundhog gravy that night at Tennessee Bowl. It was a wild life, but we loved it, every moment of it. 18 miles from Balsam Gap to Soco. We did most of that survey in the winter. The snow was deep. We went back in the spring of the year rechecking the areas, and stakes that we had driven in what we thought was the ground were laying on top of the brush piles back there in that isolated area. There were places so isolated that it would take us till 11 o'clock to walk into the survey, and then we would complete our work and naturally could walk down out of the area much faster than we walked in. Also, it was necessary for us to acquire the right-of-way, as was pointed out previously, and convey that to the federal government, controlled access, which we had never acquired before. Now, I want to say right now in the beginning that these mountain people in western North Carolina are my type of people. I'm one of them. I love them. I respect them. Thank you. There was one thing I found out about these particular mountain people, and that is that they want what belongs to them, what's rightfully theirs. As an illustration of what I'm saying, we acquired 9/100 of an acre of land from one property owner, and he demanded his $1.50 for that 9/100 of an acre. It was his, and he had a right to it, and you can't fault him for doing that. These people that were living within the bounds of the right-of-way, they're the ones that were difficult to deal with because we were destroying their homes. So the state of North Carolina devised a plan to move the houses to an area outside of the right-of-way. This made it much easier to acquire the right-of-way from these people. In all of this cooperation with these property owners, though, we ran into some situations that perhaps you would call amusing. I remember that when I replaced one of our, we call them claim adjusters in those days, I replaced one of the claim adjusters, and he filled me in on one of the unsettled claims. The next few days I went up the creek to visit this gentleman and saw him moving up the road with a pack on his back and a rifle strapped to his pack. I went ahead and parked the car and came back to him and introduced myself to him and told him my business. He says, "I thought I sent word to the Highway Commission that no damn claim adjusters would ever come and see me." And he started backing up. Every step he took back, I stepped one step with him. Within 3 weeks' time, I was eating pie with him in his kitchen. We became friends. I settled his claim with him, took his check to deliver, and he says, "No, you ain't giving me no check. I've got to have the cash." So I took him and his wife, and we went down to the bank in Spruce Pine, and he had the check cashed, and he put the money in his pocket and went his merry way. He was exercising his right of possession of his property, and you can't blame him for that. This would be amusing to you also. There was another situation where we were acquiring all of the man's property. We were to move his barn and his buildings off the right-of-way back onto his remaining property. We had employed a house mover to do the moving. On Monday morning, we went to his place to deliver his check to him and to let the contractor start moving his buildings off. He says, "No, I'm not ready to settle with you yet. I've got a setting hen out there in that barn, and unless you pay me for those eggs that you're going to destroy, I ain't gonna settle with you." So we gave him $1, and we moved his buildings. Again, I'm not saying this in a derogatory manner. These are great people. I love them. They're my people, and it is an experience that I shall carry with me to my grave. A while ago, as we're making remarks about the dream of the Parkway and how the different states were to respond, my mind wandered back to the requests that came to us from various officials of the Parkway asking for additional areas. And I can say here to you now, in all honesty, that we did not turn them down when they came to us with requests for additional areas. It was a blessing and a good experience to work with the Parkway and with my people in bringing that dream to fruition. Thank you.
When you think of how many setting hens he's removed, it's fantastic. But when you think also that all of this land had to be touched by men like him in order to bring it into the family, it was done. In Virginia, a similar way. Remember now, each state has to get the land and convey it to the federal government before anything can be done. From the Virginia side, the Virginia Highway Commission, that's here now, if you would please, from Mr. Newland, Mr. Howard Newland, from Charlottesville. In the beginning, Mr. Shirley and others along the way. He's not the original dreamer, but this man has the vision. Mr. Newland?
Thank you, Dr. Jolly. I am obviously here under false pretenses. I was 3 years old when when Null-O-Tier cut the fence, so I cannot speak with the authority of Mr. Gibbs, and I'm here substituting for the gentleman whose name is listed on your program. But I can say that we've heard a lot about the cooperation, and I think the federal government, of course, had great wisdom when they gave one of the tough jobs to the states, that is to get the land. I can set you just a little context as to what went on in Virginia, even though I specifically was not involved. In 1906, the Virginia Highway Commission was created, and the first expenditure that they made was a check for a 1,000-mile railroad ticket for the commissioner. That's the only way he could find out what was going on, because there were no roads. In 1932, when we took over the secondary system, just as North Carolina had done in 31, the road system expanded from roughly 5,000 miles to 45,000 miles overnight without any significant increase in people. Only 2 years later, while we're still down in the flatlands trying to get out of the mud, we start talking about the vision of building a road up on the mountain. And people like Commissioner Shirley and the others were given the responsibility for securing the land, going through the kinds of things Mr. Gibbs has talked about, new legislation, all of that happening within about a 2-year period. And I now work for a highway department. We have cooperation, we have environmental impact statements. I trust that we're as good as stewards of our responsibility as they were. Since I can't speak specifically about what went on, I must share with you in closing just an observation that I have developed over the last couple of days as I've sat in the symposium at Boone and as I sit here on the podium with all the people who've been names to me for so long and kind of heroes for so long. I grew up in Culpeper County, about 30 miles from the Blue Ridge, and every day I would look to the west and see these Blue Ridge Mountains. Now, I was a little farther north, so my first experiences in an automobile in the mid-30s, late 30s, was driving up to the Skyline Drive and subsequently to the Blue Ridge Parkway. My children's grandparents live in Bedford County, in the shadow of the Peaks of Autumn. And just a month ago, my wife and I took these grandparents to the Peaks of Autumn to celebrate her 86th birthday. And we've done that on their 63rd wedding anniversary, and we've done it just about every August for the last 4 or 5 years. And it suddenly dawns on me how much I have taken the Blue Ridge Parkway for granted. But I speak in the capacity that I have as a substitute for someone who could have spoken to you, and with no authority to speak for the people within the Commonwealth of Virginia, other than me, but I'm sure I speak for them. I want to thank everyone who's sitting here, and those of you in the audience, those who got the several thousand parcels of land and talked the people out of their setting hens and all of the various things that had to be done, because we know what the people like Mr. Abdul and Mr. Abbott and Commissioner Shirley and others were doing in the vision. But it ultimately came down to the fellow who cut the fence, who moved the setting hen, who turned the first shovel of ground, who drew the lines, people like Lynn Harris, who had to turn in a short pencil in order to get a longer pencil. I want to say thank you to them. I've taken it for granted, but I'll guarantee you I won't take it for granted any longer. Thank you a lot.
We took it for granted, practically all of us took it for granted, that this parkway had already been here. But no, it was from the state of Virginia, from the state of North Carolina they came. Okay, but having acquired that land by North Carolina and from Virginia, what do we do with it? Our next speaker will talk about what we did with it. The Bureau of Public Roads, again now, a federal agent. Do remember that this is a state and federal operation. It's unique. And let's take a look now and listen about what it was that the Bureau of Public Roads did. And coming to speak for us will be Mr. Ernest J. Woodrow. Let's hear and see Bureau of Public Roads. Mr. Woodrow?
Thank you very much. I'm really not going to tell you very much about the engineering here. We've been on such a high strata and so much culture and intellectual sort of approaches and treatments of these things that I don't want to humble myself that much by competing. I was with one of my older friends here, and I said to him that this celebration is really unbelievable. And I said that the fact that I took part in some of this makes me feel humble. And he said, Woody, I have followed your career very closely, and you have a hell of a lot to be humble for. I do have a feeling for the Parkway beyond its limits here so often because of its influence on other work, on highway work throughout the nation. Almost every project, particularly in, we'll say, the last couple of decades, it seems to me it has a little of the Parkway in it, and some of them, perhaps, a lot of the Parkway in it. It may be some beautiful little spot for special grading or a type of structure. It is just all those things that add up to such a marvelous project as the Parkway. Now, we have been invited at times, I say we, meaning the Parkway people who were working on it, to collaborate a little with state highway departments and certain other departments. And we didn't do any table pounding at all. The Parkway pretty much spoke for itself. If you don't mind a little farm story, there was a chicken yard, and it had a high fence, and some boys were playing football in the adjacent lot, and they kicked the football over the fence, and it landed in the chicken yard. And the rooster looked it over, and he gathered all the chickens around, and he said, I'm not making any complaints, I'm not making any demands. You're a nice bunch of cooperative girls. I just want to show you the work that's going on in the next yard. The Parkway has had that spot in highway development. I remember that I had the privilege of working with officials in one of the largest states in the country, and we were into matters such as application of Parkway principles to their particular construction. And I did have some slides, and we showed the beautiful bridges, but what we stressed mostly was the grading, the soft lines, how it was complemented, much the same as in your own beautiful home. You like to have nice grading, planting, and all that, which the structure deserves. And a little later in the program, the chief bridge engineer got up and he said, I really am very glad to have seen these examples. He said, I've been aware that that sort of thing was done on parkways. He said, I will confess right here and now that when we build our bridges, the grading around them looks like Jane Russell in a plywood brassiere. I think if I went through that state today, well, I have sometimes, I can assure you it's all maiden form. Now, let's see if I had anything else. I too want to say, just for my own satisfaction in public, that I'm just so very glad to have had the experience of the collaboration, the working together of landscape architects and engineers. And I want to tell you that if you go around and see all the marvelous engineers that are here and the landscape architects, you'll notice no brass knuckles, none whatsoever. Thank you very much.
What is amazing is that people like Woody were able to reach out and build on those little pieces that were out there and convert them into something beautiful that you and I can enjoy today. But it wasn't just them. Once they had acquired the land, laid out the design, somebody else had to pick up and do, quote, the dirty work. Somebody had to come in and do the bulldozer job. Somebody had to come in and do the labor. Let's hear from that side of the table. If I gave to you the list of the men who have had contracts on this parkway, we wouldn't go home today or tomorrow or next day. I don't intend to do that. But I do want to ask one person to come to speak to us on behalf of the contractors who have labored on this parkway. Mr. E.J. Whitmire from Franklin, North Carolina, who, by the way, did his job so well that he got a national award. We're delighted. Mr. Whitmire, contractors.
Mr. Chairman, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. I was raised on the upper reaches of the French Broad River in Transylvania County. My father grew corn, and in the fall he would trade corn for cattle. We'd bring those cattle back down to a little place called Cherryfield, sort them out, and one drove of those cattle, we would drive up through the pink beds across Wagon Road Gap, down to the east prong of the Pigeon River to the Oarsman Farm and sell them. This was in 1926 and 27, barefooted, and I became acquainted with the Wagon Road Gap and Frying Pan Gap. Little did I realize that 40 years later that my company would be bidding on a job from Mount Pisgah out to Wagon Road Gap. I told my engineer I had to have that job. I didn't tell him why. And I liked to had it too much. I was $412,000 low on $1,800,000 job. And had it not been for the dedication of my employees, my competition's wishes would have come true. They said, that'll fix him. Well, those good mountain people would come to work every day with their gunny sacks and their 8-pound lard buckets packed with fried chickens, baked sweet potatoes, and pumpkin pie. They didn't come up there out of breath because they were late to come to work. They'd come an hour ahead of work time. They'd crank up the engines and have everything ready. They refused to let me go down. I'd like to tell you a couple of instances that happened. When I came up here to the parking lot this morning, I saw these rows of porta-johns. It didn't have male or female on it or black or white. Before they'd let me start that job, I got a telegram from the Justice Department. Desegregate your toilet facilities immediately. And wire back when you have done so. And I wired back. I says, no problem. My employees